Robert and Kevin and Max found themselves standing on a sandy shore. The sky was dark and it looked like a storm was about to hit. "Of course, it's going to storm when we get here," Max grumbled. Robert and Kevin unsheathed their swords and led the way. The landscape seemed clear except for a few dead trees they passed. They had been walking for about half an hour and hadn't come across anything of interest. "What exactly are we looking for?" Kevin asked, looking around. "The catacombs. We need to find a way to go underground," Anne said, clutching her staff. Suddenly, Max's voice broke through. "What's this?" He was crouched near a round orb glowing a soft white, and kneeled down beside him to get a better look. Cautiously, she touched it. The moment her fingers made contact, she heard the unmistakable sound of clashing blades. She turned to find Robert already engaged in battle with a skeleton, swinging his sword to slice through its ribs. The skeleton cried out, but Robert swiftly severed its head. "Well, that's one skeleton down," Max said, glancing around. "How many more are going to show up?" And still kneeling, touched the orb again. A new skeleton appeared in front of her, and she quickly dodged the swing of its sword. With a swift motion, she crushed its foot with her staff. The skeleton staggered back and swung the staff over her head, bringing it down hard onto its skull. The skeleton crumpled to the ground. "It seems whenever this object is touched, it summons a skeleton," Robert said, admiring Anne's skill. "I believe that's its purpose," Anne replied, looking westward, but seeing only dirt and dead trees. "Let's keep moving and find the catacombs," Max said, sniffing the air. They continued on for a few more minutes when Anne suddenly froze. The others walked ahead a few paces before Robert stopped and called back. "I can't move any further," Anne said, struggling as though something invisible was blocking her way. Robert walked by her without any difficulty. "What's going on?" Kevin asked, confused, and tried again to move, but it was as if she was pushing against an invisible wall. "There's some kind of magical barrier preventing me, particularly me, from advancing," and explained, swinging her staff at the air in front of her. The staff struck nothing. Max frowned. "Why would it only block you?" he asked. "I can use light magic, and this is some kind of light magic entity blocker," and explained. She threw a bolt of light toward the barrier, but it barely went a foot before vanishing. "I can use light magic too, but it let me through," Max said, still puzzled. "What kind of light magic?" and asked. "Well, you know how I'm surrounded by white light when I run at an opponent? That's holy power," Max explained. Anne's eyes lit up. "Come back here and try using that power on this area where I can't get through," she instructed. Max returned, gathering his energy. Surrounded by a bright white light, he walked straight through the barrier. And followed quickly, and they both made it past. "You must have broken through the barrier," Anne said, turning to Max, who was panting heavily. "How did you do that?" Anne asked. "I'm not a normal dog, of course," Max replied. "It must have something to do with the potion, but I think Valuria's blessed me too," he added, clearly fond of her. They moved on, spotting a large mound in the distance. Approaching it, they found an ancient doorway set into the ground. "That's odd," Anne muttered as she tried to open the door by pulling on a knob. She tugged for a few seconds before deciding to take a different approach. She pointed her dagger at the door and it blasted open with a loud sound. "Amazing," Robert commented. "You're still getting used to this chosen one stuff, aren't you?" and teased him as she climbed down the ancient ladder. "Well, half a year ago, if I saw you do what you just did, I'd still be trying to wake up," Robert replied, grabbing Anne's hand. "We don't need a kissy time now," Max muttered sarcastically, glaring at them. "He's right," Anne said, shaking her head. "As much as I hate to say it, we need to get those amulets fast," she said, stepping onto the ladder. Robert followed, and Kevin climbed down after him. Max, meanwhile, simply flew down. Catacombs. They entered a large stone chamber lined with torches. And I will take the right passage." "You two go left," Robert said, motioning to Kevin and Max. Sure, he has to go with N, Max mumbled, but he followed Kevin down the left path and quickly caught up with Robert, who had his sword drawn and was moving slowly. Robert, she cried. Robert stopped suddenly, and just inches in front of him, spikes shot out from the ground. An ancient trap, and noted, there must be something important ahead. The spikes retracted, and Robert exhaled in relief. That was pleasant, he said sarcastically, and they hurried on. A sound came from behind, and before Robert could react, he swung his sword overhead and heard the satisfying sound of bones crunching. A skeleton fell to the ground, lifeless. Seems we woke up the dead with our conversation, Robert said, ready for the next attack. Robert! And yelled as a humanoid, hairy creature jumped from the wall onto Robert and rushed to help, but suddenly a half-woman, half-bird creature swooped in front of her and recognized it as a harpy. She slammed her staff into the harpy's stomach, causing it to cry out in pain. But before Anne could react, the harpy recovered quickly and slashed at her with its sharp claws. And barely dodged the strike and threw her dagger at the harpy, hitting it in the back. The harpy shrieked in agony and flapped its wings violently at Anne, and ducked down and tripped the harpy, causing it to fall. She flipped backward off the ground, drawing her dagger in midair. She plunged it into the harpy's heart, and with a final, blood-curdling screech, the creature went still. Meanwhile, the creature attacking Robert was wrestling him to the floor. It tried to pin his hands down, growling as it bared its teeth. Robert managed to trip the creature and got to his feet. He drew his sword, but the creature's long claw blocked his attack. Robert swung harder, slicing the claw off. The creature roared in pain, and Robert was surrounded by a red light. He cried out in agony but fought through it, swinging his sword wildly, cutting into the creature's arm. The creature howled in pain and sent another red light toward Robert, causing more pain. The creature jumped at Robert, but he ducked, and it toppled over him. When it landed on its back, Robert knelt down and stabbed it in the stomach. It gave one final howl before dying, and Robert was once again surrounded by a red light, crying out in pain. Once it was over, the creature lay still, and Robert stood over their fallen foes. Well, I suppose that was just a warm-up, Robert said, pulling his sword free from the creature's stomach. Black blood oozed down the blade. I'm afraid so, and replied indifferently. Meanwhile, in the Forge of Horus, a circle of vampires stood, cloaked in black, their heads bowed. In the center of the circle were two lords and a necromancer. The necromancer held the dreaded blade of Seraph, the weapon that had brought so much chaos to the world. Despite his allegiance to the dark, the necromancer hated Seraph for his love of pointless slaughter. He muttered an incantation from the Book of Necromancy, the same book that had resurrected Seraph before. As he spoke the final word, the black blade glowed a darker hue for a moment, and Seraph's laughter filled the room. The necromancer regretted using such powerful magic, but his mouth betrayed him, forcing him to utter the incantation's final word. Seraph's power surged, and the necromancer knew he had sealed his fate. The necromancer bowed low to Seraph, but Seraph's dark smile grew wider. You have served me well, but I think it's time you were more, Seraph said, his voice dripping with malice. Please, my lord, no more bloodshed, the necromancer pleaded, but Seraph's thirst for violence was insatiable. With a slash of the blade, the necromancer was struck. The blade's dark energy enveloped him, sealing his fate. Robert and Kevin and Max found themselves standing on a sandy shore. The sky was dark, and the air was thick with the sense of an incoming storm. Great, of course, it's going to storm when we get here, Max muttered. Robert and Kevin drew their swords and led the way. The landscape seemed clear, save for a few dead trees they passed. They had been walking for about half an hour without encountering anything of note. What exactly are we looking for? Kevin asked, glancing around. We need to find the catacombs, Anne said, clutching her staff. We need to get underground. Suddenly, Max's voice broke through the silence. "What's this?" He was staring at a round orb that was glowing faintly white, and knelt beside him to get a better look. Cautiously, she touched it. The moment her fingers made contact, she heard the unmistakable sound of clashing blades. She turned and saw Robert engaged in combat with a skeleton, slicing through its ribs with his sword. The skeleton cried out in a raspy voice, but Robert swiftly severed its head. "Well, that's one down," Max said, looking around. "How many more are we going to encounter?" And still kneeling, touched the orb again. Another skeleton appeared in front of her, and she quickly dodged its sword strike. With quick reflexes, she brought her staff down hard onto the skeleton's foot, causing it to stagger. Then, she swung her staff over her head, crushing the skeleton's skull. It fell lifeless to the ground. "It seems that whenever this orb is touched, a skeleton appears," Robert observed, admiring and skill. "I think that's exactly its purpose," and replied, glancing toward the west. All she saw was dirt and more dead trees. "Let's keep moving and look for the catacombs," Max said, sniffing the air. They continued their search for a while when and suddenly froze. The others walked a few paces ahead before Robert stopped and looked back. "I can't move any further," and said, trying to push forward but unable to make any progress. Robert walked by her with no trouble. "What's going on?" Kevin asked, and attempted to move again, but was stopped by an invisible barrier. "There's a magical barrier blocking my path," and explained, swinging her staff where she was being blocked. The staff struck nothing. Max frowned. "Why would the barrier only block you?" "I can use light magic, and this seems to be a light magic entity blocker," and said. She cast a bolt of light toward the barrier, but it barely traveled a foot before disappearing. "I can use light magic too, but it didn't block me," Max said, still confused. "What kind of light magic?" and asked. "Well, you know how I'm surrounded by white light when I run at an opponent? That's holy power," Max explained. Anne's face lit up. "Come back here and try your holy power on this area where I can't get through." Max returned and gathered his energy, surrounding himself with bright white light. He walked through the barrier without issue, and followed him and made it past the barrier as well. "You must have broken through the barrier," Anne said, looking at Max, who was panting from the effort. "How did you do that?" Anne asked. "I'm not a normal dog," Max replied. "It must be something to do with the potion, and I think Valuria's gave me a blessing too," he said, clearly fond of her. They moved on and soon saw a large mound in the distance. As they approached, they found an ancient doorway set into the ground. "That's odd," Anne said as she tried to open it by pulling on a knob. After a few seconds of effort, she drew her dagger and stabbed it into the door, causing it to explode open. "Amazing," Robert commented. "Still getting used to this chosen one stuff, huh?" and teased as she started climbing down a hidden ladder. "Half a year ago, if I saw you do what you just did, I'd still be trying to wake up," Robert replied, taking Anne's hand. "We don't need any kissy time now," Max muttered sarcastically, but everyone heard him. "He's right," Anne said with a sigh. "We need to move quickly and get those amulets," she said, stepping onto the ladder. Robert followed her, and Kevin climbed down after him. Max simply flew down. Catacombs. They entered a stone chamber with 2 passageways lined with torches. And I will take the right one." "You two go left," Robert said to Kevin and Max. "Sure, he has to go with Anne," Max muttered, but he followed Kevin down the left path, and quickly caught up with Robert, who was walking cautiously with his sword drawn. "Robert!" and cried as he suddenly stopped. Before him, spikes shot up from the ground. An ancient trap, and noted. There must be something important ahead. The spikes retracted, and Robert let out a sigh. "That was pleasant," he said sarcastically, and they continued on. Suddenly, Robert heard a sound from behind him. Without turning, he swung his sword overhead, striking a skeleton's skull. It collapsed, lifeless. "Seems we woke up the dead," Robert said, ready for another attack. "Robert!" and yelled as a humanoid, hairy creature leapt from the wall onto him and ran toward him, but a harpy swooped down in front of her. She recognized the creature and slammed her staff into its stomach. The harpy shrieked in pain but quickly recovered. It swiped at and with its sharp claws, and dodged just in time. She threw her dagger at the harpy, hitting it in the back. The harpy screamed again and flapped its wings furiously at Anne, and ducked and tripped the harpy, sending it crashing to the ground. She flipped backward off the ground, drawing her dagger midair, and stabbed the harpy in the heart. It spat blood and fell motionless. Meanwhile, the creature attacking Robert had him on the ground, trying to pin him. Robert managed to trip the creature and get to his feet. He drew his sword, but the creature blocked his strikes with its long claws. Robert swung harder, cutting one of the claws off. The creature roared in pain, and Robert was surrounded by a red light. He cried out but fought through it, slashing at the creature's arm. It howled again and sent another red light at Robert, causing him more pain. The creature jumped at Robert, but he ducked, and it tumbled over him. Robert quickly drove his sword into the creature's stomach. It gave a final, agonized cry before going still. And Robert looked at the fallen creatures. "Well, I suppose that was just a warm-up," Robert said, pulling his sword free. Dark blood oozed down the blade. "I'm afraid so," and said indifferently. Meanwhile, in the Forge of Horus, a circle of vampires stood, their heads bowed in reverence. In the center of the circle stood two lords and a necromancer who was holding the dark blade of Seraph, the weapon that had caused so much chaos. Despite his loyalty to the dark, the necromancer despised Seraph, who killed for pleasure. The necromancer muttered an incantation from the Book of Necromancy, the same book that had revived Seraph. As he spoke the final word, the blade glowed a darker shade for a brief moment before returning to its normal state. Seraph's laughter echoed in the room. The necromancer regretted invoking the incantation, but found himself powerless to stop. Seraph's power surged, and the necromancer knew his fate had been sealed. Seraph turned to the necromancer, his smile cold. "You've served me well, but now you'll serve me more," he said. "Please, my lord, no more bloodshed," the necromancer pleaded, but Seraph's thirst for violence couldn't be quenched. With a slash of his blade, Seraph ended the necromancer's life. The necromancer's own spell, used against him, took him to the underworld. The next day, a dog, 3 mages, a seer, a dragon morpher, and a sacred knight found themselves walking down a passageway. If my knowledge of these tombs is correct, the ritual should take place in the center of the tomb, so we need to get to the middle, and told the group. "Okay, Miss Know-It-All," and Max teased sarcastically. "How exactly are we going to do this?" and asked, looking around at the group. "Well, Robert and Kevin should handle Seraph and Cyrilla while the rest of us perform the spell on Seraph," Lucretia suggested. "I can't do the spell, though," Max pointed out. "You can use magic, Max, remember?" Valurias asked him. "Well, yeah, but not magic like that," Max replied, shrugging. "Max, don't be so difficult," Kevin said. "Respect your elders," Max retorted with a smirk. "Elders?" Robert asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm centuries older than you," Max said matter-of-factly. "The tomb." They traveled deeper into the tomb until they came upon a sealed door. There was a circular hole on one side of the door, and stepped forward and held out her hand. The hole filled with light, and the door slowly opened, revealing a large golden chamber with 3 platforms in the center. "I see you've arrived," a cold voice echoed. Seraph was standing next to Cyrilla, his death-wielding blade at the ready. His eyes were pitch black, and when he opened his mouth, his sharp fangs gleamed with fresh blood. "The amulets, please?" Cyrilla asked casually, holding out her hand, and stepped forward, her daggers drawn. "You've come to kill us and take the amulets, haven't you?" Seraph asked them indifferently. "Seraph, you can't win." "We've defeated you before," Max growled, his voice full of disdain. "Oh, have you?" You've sent me to the underground, to the underworld, killed my physical form down there. And yet, here I am, Seraph said, holding out his arms. Without warning, Seraph lunged at Robert, their blades clashing. Oh, quick, the book, and yelled, grabbing the necromancy book from Valeria's and hurriedly flipping through its pages. The battle. Meanwhile, Kevin rushed forward to assist Robert, but Cyrilla, wielding a spear, blocked his sword. Kevin spun around, slashing fiercely at his mother. Cyrilla blocked his blow with her golden spear and swung it overhead, aiming at Kevin. Kevin narrowly avoided the strike and swung his sword again at Cyrilla's stomach. She jumped back and swung the spear with such power that it sent Kevin's sword flying. He scrambled to retrieve it, but nearly got stepped on by Robert as sparks flew from the clash. Kevin quickly regained his footing and attempted to trip Seraph, but Cyrilla leaped onto him, pinning him to the ground. Kevin rolled over, shifting their positions. She cried out in pain as her wings were crushed beneath him, but Kevin used the distraction to grab his sword. Before she could reach for her spear, he went on the offensive. Cyrilla, however, still had her mind influence abilities. She locked eyes with Kevin, and he froze in place, paralyzed. She circled him, smiling with satisfaction. Kevin, you need to know the truth before you die, she said, her voice faltering slightly. Kevin was stunned, unable to speak, as Cyrilla continued. Seraph is not your father. I was in love with a dragon named Draken. He disguised himself as Seraph, and our souls connected. I didn't know what I was doing, but Seraph isn't your real father, she explained solemnly. Kevin was shocked, but the revelation was not enough to break free from the paralysis. Now you die, she said coldly, twirling 2 daggers in her hands. Before she could strike, Robert collided with her, knocking her off Kevin, and Kevin was freed from his paralysis. Thanks, Kevin quickly said. No problem, Robert replied, bringing his sword up to defend himself from Seraph's deadly blade. The spell. Meanwhile, Merlin, Lucretia, Valeria's, and Max quickly began muttering the incantation from the necromancer's book. Just as Seraph prepared to strike Robert with his blade, he suddenly froze in place. Stab yourself in the heart, and shouted, her voice full of hatred. No, this can't be. Seraph roared in fury, but he was compelled to turn his blade toward his own chest. Slowly, he brought it closer to his heart. No! Cyrilla cried, rushing toward him. It was too late. The blade pierced Seraph's heart, and blood gushed out. But then, to their horror, he began to laugh. He pulled the bloody blade out of his chest, and the wound quickly sealed. Fools, the blade inflicts instant death on a mortal, but not one of divine power like myself, Seraph sneered, grinning at them all. Anne's frustration reached a boiling point. At that moment, Kevin and Cyrilla continued their fight, and Seraph swung his blade at Robert. But Robert was ready this time, and he slashed at Seraph's shoulder. The wound quickly regenerated. Oh, I'm in trouble now, Robert thought, his mind racing, and held out her hand, and a ball of light appeared in it. She threw it at Seraph, but it had no effect. Foolish girl, watch me kill your love, Seraph taunted, readying his blade for another strike. Horace, help! And had a sudden thought. Merlin, you know how I'm considered the most powerful sorcerer ever since the gods created me, she asked urgently. Yes, I believe so, Merlin answered, watching her closely. Does that mean I have a bond with the gods? And since gods can kill other gods, could we use that to defeat Seraph? She asked, her mind racing. Yes, I believe you're right, Merlin said excitedly. Well, maybe if I can get one of the gods' weapons or summon a god, we can kill him, and said. Yes, that's the perfect answer. Merlin exclaimed. Whatever we do, we need to hurry, Max said, noticing that Robert had fallen to the ground, fending off Seraph's attacks from the floor. Shut up! Lucretia snapped at him. Max was about to protest, but realized Lucretia had a point, and closed her eyes and concentrated. A moment later, A white light appeared in front of her, and a golden figure with the head of an eagle materialized. "I knew why you have summoned me, chosen one," the god Horus said, bowing down to An. Wow, and thought. A god was bowing to her. "I am not permitted to help you physically, but I shall give you my trident," Horus continued. With a flourish, he handed An a golden trident inscribed with Egyptian symbols. Horus vanished, and the trident fell to the floor. And tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for her. No one else could lift it either. "This is useless if we can't even pick it up to use it," Max said in frustration. And looked at the trident, and it floated up into the air. "Maybe it can only be controlled by magic," Lucretia observed, stepping back. And turned to face Seraph, and the trident shot forward, aiming at him. "Christopher, the trident!" Cyrilla yelled, noticing what was happening. But Kevin, still fighting Cyrilla, swung his sword, cutting through her already damaged wing. Seraph saw the trident coming and dodged it, but Robert, who had dropped his sword to wield the trident two-handed, caught it. To his surprise, it felt light and easy to handle. "Horus' power to wield divine weapons," Merlin said, sounding impressed. "There's hope after all." Robert moved quickly, thrusting the trident at Seraph's stomach. It cut through his robes, but it didn't reach his skin. Seraph swung his blade upward and Robert ducked, doing a backflip. The blade hit Seraph in the chin, sending him stumbling back. Robert raised the trident and brought it down with all his strength. This time, it sank into Seraph's stomach. He cried out in pain and rage. Cyrilla screamed, but Kevin seized the opportunity. With one swift motion, he plunged his sword into his mother's heart. She looked at him one last time before crumbling into dust. Seraph, filled with hatred, glared at Robert. "You have not won the ultimate battle," he gasped, choking on his blood. He raised his hand, and the amulet that had been left behind by Cyrilla exploded, hitting the ceiling. "No!" Lucretia screamed in horror. It was too late. They could no longer perform the ritual to seal the underworld. Seraph let out an agonized scream, and a white light surrounded him as his body began to burn. Robert stumbled back, the trident still in his hands. Then, before their eyes, Seraph's body exploded, sending blood everywhere. "Well, that was pleasant," Max commented, as Merlin cast a spell to clean them off. Final battle. Moments later, a skeleton appeared where Seraph had been. "He's back," Kevin shouted, pulling out his sword. "I'll take care of it," Robert said, stepping forward. And Merlin, Valurias, and Lucretia raised their hands, summoning balls of light that they hurled at the skeleton. The creature cried in agony as Robert's trident pierced one of its ribs. Robert brought the trident up again, driving it through the skeleton's skull. Fire appeared behind the skeleton, and it seemed to be sucked into the flames. The entire place shook, and everyone dropped to their knees, hearing Seraph's final screams until the fire vanished. "Mission accomplished, but we can't do the ritual anymore," Max said, his voice filled with disappointment. "These amulets are worthless now," and said, removing the 2 amulets from around her neck. "Well, hey, it's your first payday, 2 amulets," Merlin said, trying to lighten the mood. The group simply shook their heads as they headed out. Falurco. A couple of weeks after the Seraph incident, the group visited Falurco. And Robert and Max had never been there before. Upon arrival, they were in awe of what they saw. Falurco was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The city was bustling with life, its teleporters scattered across various locations, allowing instant travel to different parts of the town. It spanned a vast area, and people of all ages lived there. However, Falurco was unlike any regular town. Sorcerers and knights walked freely through the streets, and the place was always teeming with activity. The transportation methods were unique. People either walked, flew, teleported, or rode magical motorcycles that floated about 10 feet in the air. There were numerous shops selling weapons, armor, magical trinkets, spellbooks, potions, and cloaks. This place is huge, Max commented, looking around in awe. I think we've all noticed that, Robert replied with a grin. They walked through the town for about half an hour, taking in the sights and sounds of this magical place. Merlin finally spoke up, his voice full of excitement. Wait until you see our old home, he said, clearly thrilled. New home? And asked, curious. Yes, you're the chosen ones, Merlin explained. You need to live here to reach your full potential. How about we unregister our apartment and move everything here? And asked, raising an eyebrow. I already took care of that, Robert replied. You did? And asked, surprised. Yeah, I arranged for some sorcerers and knights to come to our apartment and move everything for us, Robert explained. Then I unregistered us. Thank you, and said with a smile, running up to Robert and giving him a quick kiss on the lips before turning to Kevin and kissing him on the cheek. They soon arrived at a brand new castle with 2 floors. Our new home, Lucretia said, walking up the steps and opening the golden door. Our new home, Max echoed, emphasizing the word our. Yes, all of us are going to live here, Valurias replied, grinning. Don't worry, there's plenty of space. The castle had a magical lighting system that seemed to glow from within. It featured a large library, a young butler named Ferdith, a grand hall, a dining room, a potion room, an armory, and a storage room. There's more, Valurias added, moving a picture with a gold frame. Behind it, she revealed a hidden switch, which she pressed. A secret door opened, and everyone but Valurias gasped in surprise. Here's your first payday, Valurias said with a smile. The room was completely filled with gold coins. The currency here is gold, and the council members know about the service you've provided to the universe, Valurias continued. They've added to your account. And looked at the mound of gold coins, and with a flick of her hand, the gold disappeared. She grabbed Robert by the hand. He almost stumbled, but quickly caught up with her. Where are we going? He asked, still a little bewildered. Shopping, and said simply, pulling him out the door.